Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're doing something really fascinating. We're taking a completely neutral, under-the-hood look at how internet comedy and geopolitical satire actually work. We're going to deconstruct a highly partisan piece of digital content just to see exactly how complex, real-world rivalries get weaponized and honestly oversimplified for laughs online. Our source material today is a viral-style transcript from a YouTube channel called The Liberal Hindu. Now, just to be clear, we aren't here to take sides or endorse any viewpoints. Instead, we're basically putting on our data analyst hats, breaking down the exact script to understand how this specific flavor of digital satire is built from the ground up.
Right out of the gate, the opening line plunges us directly into the tone of the whole piece. The script is framed as this mock United Nations address targeting Pakistan's leadership, and it starts out setting up this super formal diplomatic vibe, addressing the Mr. Secretary. But then it instantly undercuts all that formality with this singular, hyper-focused obsession. It's a classic bait-and-switch comedic setup, and it lays the perfect groundwork for the absolute barrage that's about to follow. To make sense of this pretty chaotic script, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the setup of the satirical UN address. Second, the repetition comedic device. Third, the themes of financial ruin. Fourth, the conflict and terrorism references. And finally, the attacks on leadership.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, a satirical UN address and the repetition comedic device. Because, before we even get into the geopolitical arguments they're trying to make, we really have to look at how this joke is literally built, word by word.
The creators use a really specific and honestly very aggressive rhetorical trick here. They take the name of the disputed region, Kashmir, and they just insert it over and over again. It doesn't even function as a subject in a sentence. Instead, it acts like this obsessive verbal tick. It's totally designed to derail the mock speaker's own train of thought. By using the word as a relentless punctuation mark, the satire is basically suggesting a leadership so utterly consumed by one single issue that they literally cannot even form a coherent sentence about their own domestic crises without constantly interrupting themselves.
To really wrap your head around the scale of this device, just think about this number, 65. In a transcript that's only about 150 words total, the word Kashmir is dropped over 60 times. That is wild. It's not just a recurring joke, right? It's the primary structural frame of the entire monologue. It dictates the whole rhythm and pacing of the script, pretty much forcing the viewer to experience that perceived obsession firsthand.
In fact, if you treat the text like a dataset and look at the word count, it becomes incredibly clear that this sheer repetition just completely overwhelms the piece. The repetition of that one word completely dwarfs all the actual substantive geopolitical points about economics or the military or the personal critiques. The medium literally becomes the message here. The repetition itself is the joke.
Let's move on to Section 2, Themes of Financial Ruin. Because beneath all those verbal tics, the script is definitely attempting to paint a very specific picture of a nation in crisis.
The first major substantive theme the creators drill down on is severe economic distress. The satire completely strips away any kind of diplomatic nuance and just replaces it with blunt desperation. You get lines like, "We have no dollars left," and "We have become beggars," which paints a picture of a state going through total financial collapse. The comedic angle here really relies on the stark contrast between the dignified, serious setting of a UN address and the deeply undignified act of openly begging for cash on the world stage.
And it goes beyond just macroeconomic failure. The script digs right into basic domestic infrastructure collapse. It highlights a state that's unable to provide fundamental utilities to its people, bluntly complaining about no electricity and no water. It even references begging for a fund for dam. This takes all that abstract geopolitical mockery and grounds it in very tangible, everyday crises. It suggests an administration that's failing at the absolute most basic levels of governance, while paradoxically still being fixated on international disputes.
What's really crucial here is how the satire explicitly names 4 major international entities. The script doesn't just put out a broad ask for money. It specifically name drops the IMF, CPEC, Saudi Arabia, and China. By listing these out in rapid succession, the creators are mocking the country's perceived heavy reliance on foreign bailouts and strategic partnerships just to keep the lights on. It literally paints a picture of a nation bouncing from one global superpower or financial institution to the next, hat in hand.
Okay, Section 3, Conflicts and Terrorism References. Moving past the economic critiques, we see the creators attempt to summarize decades of incredibly complex, tragic tension into rapid-fire, internet-friendly buzzwords.
The script haphazardly throws out these historical flashpoints,
But, when you take a step back and actually map them on a timeline, a very deliberate pattern emerges. We go from the 1971 war to Kargil in 1999, the discovery of Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad in 2011, all the way to the Pathankot attack in 2016. The creators are making a very conscious effort to chronicle major military conflicts and high-profile incidents of terrorism. They are essentially condensing 45 years of really fraught regional history into just a few seconds of mockery.
Alongside those timeline events, the creators treat the text almost like a checklist of geopolitical trigger words. They mix accused terrorists like Hafiz Saeed and the Haqqani network with captured individuals like Kulbhushan Jadhav, tragic events like the Peshawar attack, and even highly specific diplomatic snubs, like referencing an Indian minister, Sushma Swaraj, walking out of a meeting. It is just an overwhelming barrage of names and events stripped of all their context, used solely as comedic ammunition to depict a rogue state.
Which brings us to Section 4, Attacks on the Leadership. And I have to say, this is where the source material undergoes a very sudden, very sharp tonal shift.
This pivot is pretty fascinating. We go straight from state issues like macroeconomics and foreign debt directly into tabloid-style attacks. The script just suddenly drops international relations entirely in favor of mocking the prime minister's personal life. It specifically references his 2 divorces and 3 marriages, names his ex-wife Reham Khan, and even throws in a homophobic insult. It really highlights a super common tactic in digital satire. When the actual geopolitical arguments are exhausted, the rhetoric devolves into highly personal, schoolyard-level insults designed to humiliate rather than actually critique.
Finally, after that incredibly chaotic journey through economics, history, terrorism, and personal smears, the script loops right back to exactly where it started. The final lines cement the caricature, leaving you with the image of a leader who has learned absolutely nothing, achieved nothing in the speech, and just remains trapped in that singular obsession while making one last, pathetic plea for cash. That circular nature of the script brilliantly reinforces its underlying satirical message of absolute stagnation. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we've seen exactly how easily decades of war and economic struggle can be distilled into a 150-word joke designed purely for algorithms. Sure, it gets laughs, but it entirely erases the nuance. I want to leave you with a provocative thought today. When our primary exposure to rival nations comes through highly partisan, hyper-condensed digital satire like this, how does that shape or perhaps completely distort our real-world understanding of the human beings on the other side? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.